She knocked at his door, needing work. He hired her to cook, but when she bent to tie her boot and her cross necklace fell out, his blood ran cold. It was identical to the one his sister wore before vanishing. The knock echoed just as Thomas was scraping cold beans from a skillet. A solitary meal eaten under the shadow of his hat still hung from its sunrise duty. He startled. He wasn't expecting anyone, not for another 3 days when Lyle delivered the feed. Another knock, louder this time, impatient, as if the journey had been too long to suffer being ignored. He wiped his mouth on his sleeve and swung open the door. She stood there, dusty and travel-worn, her bare feet hinting at a journey undertaken with little regard for comfort, dressed in brown homespun that swept to her ankles, her arms kissed red by the sun, and a scarf concealing her hair. Perhaps 25, though the hardships etched upon her face made it difficult to tell. Her eyes, however, hadn't surrendered their light. "I heard you needed a cook," she said, foregoing greetings, her hands clasped tightly on the worn strap of her burlap sack. Her voice was a dry rasp, as though drawn from a well long neglected, suggesting days spent without speaking. Thomas stepped onto the porch. The sun bled crimson behind the cottonwoods, bathing her in a spectral glow. It caught the small silver cross nestled at her throat, flashing an unmistakable glint. No, it wasn't just a cross, it was the cross. The same subtly bent left arm, the same crude, almost imperceptible stamping along the bottom edge, smoothed by years of a nervous thumb tracing its outline. Thomas stood transfixed, his hand falling numbly to his side. "Are you all right?" she asked, tilting her head. But he was far from all right. He was no longer seeing her, but a memory of 10 years past, the night his little sister Abigail fled into the unforgiving snow, her cross a fleeting pendulum against her chest, her breath painting ephemeral white roses in the air. She never returned, leaving behind only unanswered questions and the chilling silence of loss. Only her boots by the door, and the empty space where her cross used to be. Until now. He swallowed hard, finding his voice with effort. "Come in." She entered with hesitant steps, not presuming welcome, her eyes fixed forward, placing her sack by the cold hearth and turning toward the kitchen as if guided by a forgotten instinct. "I can make stew if you have salt and fat." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "What's your name?" A flicker of hesitation crossed her features. "Grace." "Grace what?" Her movement stilled at the stove. "I don't use the last anymore." An evasion, perhaps a truth cloaked in deeper shadows, but he let it pass. Thomas refrained from questioning the exhaustion etched on her face, or the fading bruises that mottled her wrists, hinting at a rough and recent handling. He held his silence because the cross spoke with a volume that surpassed any answer she might offer. He sank into the chair by the hearth, his eyes fixed on her as she peeled turnips with an unnerving speed and efficiency. When she bent to adjust her worn boots, the cross slid free once more, constricting his breath. A primal urge surged within him, to seize it, demand answers, unleash the years of pent-up grief and question, "Where did you get it? Where is Abigail?" But something in Grace's demeanor, a fragile alertness, cautioned him. Push, and I will vanish. He had already lost one woman to the void, he would not risk losing another. That night his appetite was a mere pretense. He watched her serve, washed the dishes with practiced economy, and finally settled cross-legged by the dying embers. She made no requests for a bed, her expectations seemingly non-existent. He laid a blanket on the wooden bench beside her before retiring, his sleep restless and fractured. By dawn she was already at work, the aroma of eggs and biscuits filling the cabin, a newfound purpose animating her movements. By the third day, the kitchen resonated with echoes of his mother's presence, the fragrant whispers of rosemary, the comforting scent of flour, and the savory promise of bacon fat. Yet Thomas remained silent about the cross, biding his time, needing to gather more than just hope. He began with gentle inquiries, probing the edges of her past. "You from around here?" "No." "Any family nearby?" "No." "Running from something?" A prolonged silence settled over the room, heavy with unspoken truths. "Yes." She offered nothing more, respecting the unspoken boundary. But each evening she hummed a soft melody by the fire, a haunting refrain without words. And then one night, it struck him with the force of revelation. It was Abigail's lullaby. He dropped his spoon with a resounding clatter, the stew splashing onto the floor. Grace looked up, startled, her eyes reflecting a raw vulnerability. He shook his head, trying to regain composure. The same cross, the same song. The realization hardened his resolve. That night, under the cloak of darkness, he saddled his mare and rode westward towards the old stone church where Abigail had been baptized, where her cross had received its blessing. He found Miss Harriet, the choir mistress, now nearing 80 and her eyesight dimming, and played Grace's tune for her on a borrowed fiddle. Her eyes widened, her fragile face illuminated by recognition. "That's Abigail's song," she breathed, her voice raspy with age and emotion. She composed it herself, a melody she promised to sing to her own babies one day. "Are you certain?" "I would stake my salvation on it, Thomas." He rode back with a heart pounding with a mixture of dread and elation. As dawn painted the sky, he found the cabin empty. Grace was gone. So too was her sack, the remaining stew, and the worn quilt from the bench. Only a neatly folded note remained on the counter. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to deceive you. You are too kind, far too kind for someone like me." The note ended with one line, "Don't follow," but he was already moving, driven by a force beyond reason. He tracked her footprints through the dewy grass, past the bluff, across the parched creek bed, and into the unforgiving terrain of the ridge. He found a piece of fabric snagged on a mesquite thorn, and then, his blood turning to ice, a single drop of blood staining a stone. And then he saw them, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. Two men on horseback, their faces brutal and unforgiving, were tightening ropes around her wrists, hauling her roughly onto a saddle. One bore a jagged scar bisecting his left eye, the other brandished a rifle with casual menace. Thomas instinctively dropped to the ground, seeking cover behind a rocky outcrop. Grace fought with fierce desperation, her cries faint and indistinguishable in the wind. They secured her to the saddle horn and spurred their horses westward. He pursued them relentlessly, mile after agonizing mile. The sun beat down mercilessly, scorching his throat and blurring his vision, but he pressed on, fueled by a desperate hope and the burning embers of a decade-long torment. Finally, the men led their horses into a secluded gully, a natural amphitheater enclosed by towering rocks, offering a semblance of shade and respite. He meticulously assessed the situation. One revolver, one rifle, two ruthless men, and one fragile chance. He waited, his muscles coiled until they lowered their guard to water their exhausted horses. Then he exploded into action. A single, clean shot from his rifle brought Scarface crashing to the ground. The second man spun around, a snarl twisting his features. But Thomas was already upon him, tackling him from behind, wrenching the rifle from his grasp, and pressing it against his temple with unwavering resolve. "Let her go!" Grace was slumped against the saddle horn, her body racked with sobs, her dress torn and stained with dust and blood. The man spat blood. "She's a runaway, hired out fair and square. Whose right gives you ownership?" He cocked the hammer, the click echoing ominously. The man's defiance wavered, replaced by a flicker of fear. "She's yours now, I reckon." Thomas resisted the urge to fire, instead slamming the butt of the rifle against the man's temple, silencing him. He swiftly untied Grace, freeing her from her bonds. She collapsed into his arms, her sobs a torrent of pent-up fear and anguish. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she choked out. "Then let me see you, truly see you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you, no more hiding." She pulled back slightly, her swollen lip trembling, but her hand instinctively went to her neck, clutching the familiar comfort of the cross. "I was 6 when they tore me away from my family," she began, her voice barely audible. "All I have left are fragments, the sound of my brother's voice, a half-remembered lullaby." Thomas felt his knees weaken, his breath catching in his throat. "What did he call you?" "Abby," she breathed, the name emerging like a whispered prayer. "Not Grace. Abigail." He remained speechless, his emotions a chaotic storm within him. He reached out, cupping her face in his trembling hands. "Thomas," she said, her voice laced with disbelief, "is it really you?" He could only nod, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. She gave way completely, collapsing against him, and they wept together, their tears mingling like the waters of a long-dammed river finally released, washing away the bitterness of a decade of separation. Thomas held her close, as if afraid she might dissolve back into the shadows. The wind whispered through the gully, carrying the scent of dust and sage, and Abigail, shedding the name of Grace like a discarded skin, clung to him with the desperation of a child seeking solace in a storm. Her face was buried against his chest, her breath shallow and ragged, but he could feel the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat against his ribs. For 10 long years, Thomas had conjured this moment, imagined the joyous reunion. He pictured a church bathed in sunlight, a wedding overflowing with laughter, perhaps even a Christmas miracle. Never could he have foreseen finding her like this, battered, half-starved, on the brink of being dragged back into the clutches of men who sought to own her. She was his sister, but no longer the little girl he remembered. He lifted her onto the back of his horse, as light as a feather, her body weakened by hardship and fear. She offered no resistance, her arms locked around his neck, her breath hot against his skin. The ride back to the ranch was a silent pilgrimage, broken only by the wind and the occasional stifled sob that escaped her lips. As they arrived, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. Thomas carried her into the cabin, his movements gentle and deliberate, and laid her carefully on the wooden bench, shielding her from further harm. He lit the lantern, its warm glow illuminating the contours of her face. "Let me see," he said quietly, crouching to examine the raw welts on her wrists, chafed raw by the ropes. She flinched, wincing at his touch. "They put me on a cart when I was barely big enough to walk, told me I was too far from home, sold me 3 times over before I turned 10. His movements faltered, his hands clenching into fists. "They said I wasn't worth much. Too quiet, too awkward. Nobody wanted a big girl for housework," she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. "But I learned to cook, and I learned to listen. Always listen. That's how I managed to escape last time." He poured warm water into a chipped enamel bowl and dampened a cloth, his hands trembling as he wrung it out. "Do you remember anything before that? Before they took you?" "Glimpses," she whispered, her voice laced with a fragile hope. "Mama's song, your worn boots, the way you used to break open biscuits and save the soft middle for me." Her lip trembled, but she managed a weak smile. "I never stopped looking for you, Thomas. I thought you were gone. Dead." "And I believed the same about you." The tears flowed freely now, their shared grief a tangible presence in the small room. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he gathered her close, his arms a protective shield against the world, letting her rest there, safe and secure in his embrace. That night, he surrendered his bed to her, taking the bench by the hearth for himself, the fire crackling softly in the silence. She offered a whispered, "Thank you," before drifting into a troubled sleep. And when the first rays of morning seeped through the cracks in the walls, Thomas found himself watching her breathe, his heart overflowing with a mixture of disbelief and profound relief. The following days unfolded like a dream, tinged with the lingering shadows of a nightmare. Grace, Abigail, still hesitant to fully embrace her true name, clung to the familiar alias, as if the sound of Abby evoked a phantom, a person stolen from her past. He respected her wishes, granting her the time she needed to reclaim her identity. She moved through the house with a quiet purpose, cooking, cleaning, tending to the horses with a natural grace that belied her years of servitude. The scars on her body, both visible and hidden, told a story of hardship and resilience, but she remained silent about them, her strength drawn from some deep well of inner fortitude. Then came the knock, shattering the fragile peace they had begun to build. It was hard, insistent, laced with an undercurrent of anger. Thomas opened the door, his hand instinctively resting on the revolver holstered at his hip. 3 men stood before him, their faces grim and determined. The one in the lead, his weathered features hinting at years spent under a harsh sun, tipped his hat with a perfunctory gesture. "Afternoon. We have reason to believe you are harboring someone who doesn't belong to you." Thomas offered no response, his silence a deliberate act of defiance. "Are you knowingly harboring a runaway, sir?" the second man pressed, his lips twisting into a sneer. "State your name and business," Thomas countered, his voice calm but unwavering. "Warden Josiah Clay," the man declared, puffing out his chest. "These here are deputies of the Graham estate." "I don't recognize the name." "You will," he said, stepping forward, his gaze hardening. "We're looking for a woman answering to the name of Grace. Short, roundish, noticeable silver cross necklace. Rings any bells?" Thomas remained impassive. "There is no one here by that name." A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant chirping of birds. "Are you certain, Mr. Talbert? There's a substantial bounty on her head." Thomas stepped onto the porch, his height and imposing presence suddenly magnified. "I said, there is no one here by that name." Josiah's eyes narrowed, darting toward the barn, then over Thomas's shoulder, noting the thin plume of smoke rising from the chimney. "We'll return with a writ in hand." "You bring one?" Thomas replied, his voice low and menacing. "And you'd best bring a coffin, too." While the men exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado momentarily faltering, they hesitated for another moment before wheeling their horses around and riding off in a swirl of dust. Thomas slammed the door shut and turned. Abigail stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with apprehension. She had overheard every word. "They won't stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Neither will I." She sank into the nearest chair, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "They'll bring the law, the judge himself. You'll lose your land, your reputation, everything. You are my sister, Abigail." Her lip quivered, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Not anymore. Not after everything." His fist slammed down on the table, the force of the blow making the dishes rattle. "Don't you ever say that. Blood is blood, Abigail." Her eyes flickered up, a spark of defiance igniting within them. "Then let me do something worthwhile, for once in my life." That night, under the cover of darkness, Abigail vanished once more. This time, there was no note, only a small bundle of biscuits wrapped in a cloth left on the kitchen counter, and the back door left slightly ajar. Thomas was already in the saddle before the first rays of dawn painted the sky, his heart pounding with a mixture of fury and dread. He tracked her footprints through the dew-soaked earth, following the telltale signs of her passage. They led eastward, towards the desolate expanse of the flats, and then turned sharply south. She was deliberately trying to lead them away from him, sacrificing herself to protect him and his home. By sunset, he found her huddled behind a broken wagon wheel, shivering uncontrollably, her dress soaked through from a treacherous river crossing. "You weren't supposed to follow," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the rustling wind. He dismounted in silence and wrapped his coat around her trembling shoulders, offering her what little warmth he could provide. She didn't resist his touch, but her eyes remained fixed on the ground, filled with a profound sadness. "I don't belong in your world anymore, Thomas," she whispered. "I belong to their world. I am tainted by it." "No," he said firmly, his voice resonating with conviction. "You belong to God's world, Abigail, and you belong to me." She lifted her head, her gaze locking with his, her eyes filled with a kaleidoscope of emotions. "I'm not that sweet, innocent girl you remember. I have seen things. I have done things. I am too much now, too broken, too loud, too wide, too strong," he interjected, cutting through her self-deprecation. She swallowed hard, her throat constricting with emotion. "Too brave, too smart, too deeply loved." Her eyes welled with tears once more. "You are not a burden, Abigail. You are my home, the missing piece I thought I had lost forever." She broke then, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. And in the dirt, under the watchful gaze of the stars, she collapsed against him, not as Grace, the haunted stranger, but as Abigail, the sister he had mourned for a decade, now miraculously returned to him. They remained hidden for 3 agonizing days, seeking refuge in the loft of an old friend's stable. His friend, a taciturn man with eyes that had witnessed too much suffering, asked no questions, offering only silent support, bringing them stew and keeping the doors tightly bolted against the encroaching world. On the 4th day, Thomas rode into town, his jaw set, his gaze unwavering. He walked into the sheriff's office, carrying a small bundle wrapped in a worn cloth. "I want to file a report," he stated, his voice calm but resolute. The sheriff, a weary man with a world-worn face, looked up from his desk. "About what, Mr. Talbot?" Thomas placed the silver cross on the scarred wooden surface. "My sister was kidnapped 10 years ago," he began, his voice laced with controlled fury. "She is back now, but men are hunting her like she is a piece of property." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have proof that she is actually your sister, Mr. Talbot? Proof that will stand up in court? She remembers the scar behind my ear, knows the lullaby Mama used to hum. She bears the same distinctive mole on the back of her hand. And this," he tapped the cross, his fingers lingering on the worn silver, "was blessed the day she was born." The sheriff considered his words, his expression unreadable. "That is a considerable amount of circumstantial evidence, Mr. Talbot. I want her name cleared officially. I want the Graham claim thoroughly investigated." "You must realize that the Grahams are powerful men," the sheriff cautioned, his voice laced with concern. Thomas nodded, his gaze unwavering. "So is justice, Sheriff. Or at least it should be." The sheriff sighed, rubbing his weary eyes. "You will have to testify, Mr. Talbot. All of this will come down to your word against theirs." "I will," Thomas affirmed, his voice ringing with conviction. He left the office with shaking hands, not from fear, but from the burning intensity of his resolve. Abigail would not run again, not from anyone. When he returned to the stable, he found her sitting on the steps, staring out at the rolling hills, her expression unreadable. He handed her a glass of cool water and sat beside her, his presence a silent reassurance. "I filed a report with the sheriff," he announced, his voice matter-of-fact. She froze, her body tensing. "If they want to fight this, Abigail, they will have to do it in the light of day, with pen and oath, not with rope and rifle in the shadows." "I am scared, Thomas." "So am I, Abigail. But we are doing it anyway, together." He placed his hand over hers, his touch offering solace and strength. "I am your big brother, Abigail. Protecting you is my job." She looked down, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I always dreamed that one day someone might actually love me for who I am, not in spite of me, not because they felt obligated, but because they truly saw me, the real me." "I see you, Abigail," he said softly, his voice filled with tenderness. "And I am so proud of the woman you have become." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and lingering doubt. "You are my brother, Thomas. You are bound to say that." But Thomas noticed something else, a subtle shift in her gaze, a fleeting glance toward the barn, and the faint flush that crept up her neck when the stable hand Caleb passed by carrying a bucket of oats. He said nothing, but a small smile played on his lips. Love, he knew, bloomed in the most unexpected places, and perhaps, just perhaps, God was offering her a second chance. Not just at a life free from fear, but at something deeper, something truly healing. The barn was quiet after supper, the sounds of the animals settling down for the night filling the air. Most nights, Thomas let the cattle settle before dusk. But tonight his mind wandered, drawn by an unspoken curiosity. He watched from the shadows, unnoticed, as Abigail shyly handed Caleb a small jar of homemade preserves. She did not say much, her usual loquaciousness replaced by a quiet nervousness. But Caleb smiled at her, a genuine and heartfelt smile, and she did not flinch when he reached for the jar, their fingers brushing for a fleeting moment. That simple gesture spoke volumes, conveying a silent understanding and a budding connection. Thomas eased back into the shadows, respecting their privacy, He was not the meddling kind, particularly when it came to matters of the heart, but he had witnessed that look in a woman's eyes before, the unmistakable glimmer of hope, the quiet longing for safety and acceptance. And he had observed Caleb closely enough to discern that the young man did not see Abigail the way the rest of the world did. He did not stare at her size, nor did he attempt to diminish her voice or silence her spirit. He listened, his attention unwavering, his demeanor always gentle and respectful. God, it seemed, truly did work in mysterious ways. But there were other, darker forces at play, forces that threatened to shatter the fragile peace they had begun to construct. By morning, word had spread like wildfire, carried on the wind and whispered in hushed tones. Warden Josiah Clay returned, his face contorted with rage, this time accompanied by 10 heavily armed men. They carried a writ bearing the official seal of Judge Turnbull, a corrupt and avaricious man known to be in the pocket of the Graham family. They rode up with brazen arrogance, their horses blocking the path to the house. Josiah dismounted, waving the legal document in the air as if it were holy scripture. "You filed a report, Mr. Talbert, but I possess legal claim in my hands, and it states unequivocally that this woman is rightfully the property of the Graham estate." Thomas stood his ground on the porch, his gaze unwavering, his hand never straying far from the revolver at his hip. "Then your law is fundamentally broken, and your legal claim is invalid. This woman, Grace, is explicitly named as property in this legally binding document, and by order of this court, she is to be returned to her rightful owners." Thomas remained unmoved, his expression a mask of implacable resolve. "Her name is Abigail, not Grace. She was kidnapped as a child, robbed of her birthright, and subjected to years of unspeakable suffering." Josiah stepped forward, his eyes flicking to the window behind Thomas, where he caught a glimpse of a curtain twitching. "If you continue to harbor her, Mr. Talbert, you become an accessory to the crime, liable for aiding and abetting a fugitive, and guilty of theft and fraud." "What I am guilty of is protecting my family," Thomas declared, his voice resonating with unwavering conviction. Josiah chuckled, a harsh and humorless sound. "Are you truly willing to die for a woman who is not even related to you by blood? A big girl, as they say, who has clearly brought you nothing but trouble?" Thomas's grip tightened on his holster, his knuckles turning white. "Yes, I am." A tense silence descended upon the scene, broken only by the restless shifting of horses' hooves and the distant cawing of crows. Then, the door creaked open behind him. Abigail stepped out onto the porch, her presence radiating an unexpected strength. She wore her best dress, a simple but elegant garment she had meticulously mended herself. It hugged her waist, flared at her hips, and accentuated her curves without apology. She made no attempt to conceal her arms or to minimize her soft, rounded cheeks. She stood tall, her chin held high, her eyes blazing with righteous defiance. "Allow me to speak," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. Thomas hesitated for a moment, then stepped back, ceding the floor to her. Josiah smirked, his eyes narrowing in triumph. "So you finally acknowledge that you answer to the name of Grace?" "No," she said, her voice unwavering. "I answer only to the Lord, and to the name given to me by my loving mother, Abigail Ruth Talbert." A flicker of discomfort crossed the faces of the deputies, their initial bravado momentarily shaken by her unwavering self-assurance. Josiah scoffed, his arrogance quickly returning. "That does not change the facts, woman. It does not alter what is written in this legally binding document." She stepped down from the porch, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft earth. "It changes everything, Warden Clay. I am not chattel, not a piece of property to be bought and sold like livestock. I was taken, stolen from my family, robbed of my identity. This cross," she lifted the silver chain from beneath her collar, holding the cross aloft, "is proof of my birth, proof of my lineage, proof of my belonging. You do not own me. You have never owned me. You own nothing but your own shame and your own corruption." One of the men behind Josiah shifted uncomfortably in the saddle, averting his gaze. "You speak with remarkable confidence," Josiah sneered, "for a woman who has nowhere else to go in this world." "But I do have somewhere to go, Mr. Clay," she said softly, her eyes shining with unwavering conviction. "I have here, this is where I belong." That single word, "here," resonated through the yard like a sacred hymn, a testament to belonging, love, and resilience. Thomas's fingers clenched around the wooden post, his heart swelling with pride. Josiah spat on the ground, his face contorted with impotent rage. "We will see what the judge says when you are dragged before him in chains, woman." "That will never happen," came a voice from behind them, filled with a quiet but unwavering resolve. Caleb stepped out from the barn, a pitchfork resting casually on his shoulder, hay clinging to his worn work shirt. His shoulders were broad, his arms corded with muscle, and though younger than Thomas, his eyes possessed a steely glint of unwavering courage. Without a moment's hesitation, he moved to Abigail's side, standing shoulder to shoulder with her, a silent declaration of his unwavering support. "She is not yours, Mr. Clay," he stated, his voice calm but firm. "And she never will be." Thomas stepped down from the porch, joining the line, standing shoulder to shoulder with Abigail and Caleb, an unbreakable bond of love and loyalty. "If you want her," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "you will have to go through all of us." The moment hung suspended in the air, thick with tension, the possibility of violence palpable. Then, Josiah Clay cursed under his breath, his face a mask of frustrated fury, and yanked on the reins of his horse. "We will be back," he spat, his voice filled with a chilling promise. "I will be waiting," Thomas replied, his gaze unwavering, his resolve unbreakable. They held a council of war that night, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the oil lamp. Abigail remained largely silent, curled up on the couch, clutching the silver cross in her hands, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Caleb took a seat on the hearth, his gaze never leaving her face, offering silent reassurance and unwavering support. Thomas paced the floor, his mind racing, weighing their options, preparing for the inevitable storm to come. "They will return," Caleb said, his voice filled with grim certainty. "They will likely come back with even more men, and perhaps even Judge Turnbull himself. They want to make an example of us, to crush any hope of resistance." Abigail swallowed hard, her throat constricting with fear. "Then perhaps I should allow them to take me," she said softly, her voice filled with despair. Thomas stopped pacing, his body tensing. "What are you saying, Abigail?" "If they get me, they will leave the two of you alone. They will leave this ranch alone. I can endure whatever they throw at me. I am strong enough to survive." "No!" Thomas snapped, his voice laced with anger and pain. "You don't merely survive, Abigail. You live fully and completely, and that is entirely different." Her lip trembled, and tears began to well up in her eyes. "But you will lose everything, Thomas. You have already lost everything once, a lifetime ago. I will not let you bury me again." She stared into the flames, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. Then Caleb spoke, his voice soft and clear, cutting through the despair that threatened to engulf them. "Marry me, Abigail." The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the pounding of their hearts. Abigail turned slowly, her eyes searching Caleb's face, seeking some hidden motive, some ulterior purpose. "What?" "Marry me, Abigail," he repeated, his voice filled with sincerity and unwavering resolve. "If you are my wife, they will have absolutely no legal claim over you." Thomas stared at Caleb, his mind reeling, trying to comprehend the depth and significance of his proposition. Caleb stood up now, his heart pounding so loudly that it seemed to fill the entire silence of the room. "I have watched you, Abigail," he confessed, his voice filled with admiration. "You carry more grace and strength in your calloused hands than most men possess in their entire bodies. You are not too much, Abigail. You are not too big, too broken, or too anything. You are exactly who you were meant to be." "But I am not what men want," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You are everything that I want, Abigail Ruth Talbert." She stood up, her face flushed, her hands trembling. "Do not say this just to save me, Caleb," she pleaded, her voice filled with a desperate hope. "I am not Abigail," he said, his gaze locking with hers, his eyes filled with unwavering sincerity. "I have been searching for the right words to tell you for weeks, but maybe the right time is right now, in this moment." A long, pregnant beat passed between them. Then, she stepped forward slowly, each step measured, as if every movement threatened to shatter the fragile hope that had blossomed within her, and she said the only thing she could, the only word that truly mattered. "Yes, Caleb," she whispered, her voice filled with love and gratitude. They were wed the next morning, just before the sun crested the horizon, painting the eastern sky in a glorious symphony of colors. There were no guests, no extravagant celebrations, just Thomas, a well-worn Bible, and two hands clasped tightly together under the watchful gaze of God. Abigail wore a simple pale blue dress, adorned with a ribbon in her hair, her eyes shining with an ethereal beauty. Caleb stood tall beside her, his hand steady against hers, his gaze filled with unwavering love and devotion. Thomas's voice cracked with emotion as he read the ancient vows, his heart overflowing with a mixture of joy and profound gratitude. And when he finally spoke the words, "You may kiss your bride," Caleb did not hesitate. He did not shrink back, nor did he treat her with any hint of delicacy. He cupped her cheeks in both hands, his touch reverent and tender, and kissed her with a passion and depth that transcended mere desire, as though she was not just wanted, but cherished, revered, and eternally loved. Thomas watched, tears streaming down his face, and he knew in that moment that something profound had shifted, something infinitely bigger than he or Abigail or Caleb could have ever imagined, not just for them, but for the entire community. They prepared for the worst, their wedding vows providing them with a stronger legal footing, but failing to extinguish the embers of hatred and prejudice. By week's end, Josiah Clay returned, accompanied by a veritable army of 10 heavily armed men. They abandoned all pretense of legality, their intentions clear from the glint of steel in their hands. Thomas saw the rifles before the dust even settled, his heart sinking with grim resignation. He instructed Abigail to remain inside the house, shielding herself from the impending violence. She refused, her chin held high, her eyes blazing with righteous defiance. As the riders circled the ranch, their presence an ominous threat, Caleb stood his ground at the fence line, his stance unwavering, his gaze defiant. Thomas joined him, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brother-in-law, a silent testament to their unwavering loyalty and their shared determination to protect their home. Several ranch hands came forward as well, standing in solidarity with the Talberts, their faces etched with grim resolve. Word had spread throughout the community, and not all hearts bowed to the authority of the Grahams. Josiah rode to the front of the menacing procession, a smirk twisting his lips. "So you thought a mere ring would be enough to protect her from justice, Mr. Talbert?" "It protects what is sacred and what is holy," Thomas retorted, his voice ringing with conviction. "You bring that fraudulent writ with you again, Clay, and I will personally burn it on your grave." Josiah let out a harsh laugh. "All right, Talbert, have it your way," he said, raising his hand, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Then we will do this the old-fashioned way." And with that, he drew his revolver, the metallic click echoing ominously in the tense silence. But before he could even aim, a rifle cracked from the ridge overlooking the ranch, the sound sharp and deafening. The bullet whizzed past Josiah's head, cleanly taking the hat off the head of the man standing beside him. A second shot followed in quick succession, striking a rock near the hooves of Josiah's horse, sending the animal into a frenzy of panicked movements. The riders, taken by surprise, scattered in disarray, their bravado momentarily shattered. They looked up, their eyes searching the crest of the hill, and there, silhouetted against the clear blue sky, stood a line of a dozen riders, armed and ready to defend what was right. They were not ranchers, not soldiers, but something far more potent and dangerous. They were former bondsmen, runaways, and outcasts, men and women who remembered Abigail from the kitchens, the fields, and the hushed desperation of escape in the dead of night. They had heard the whispers of her plight, the rumors of the injustices being perpetrated by the Grahams, and they had come, answering a call that transcended fear and self-preservation. Caleb grinned, a wide, triumphant grin that spread across his face. "Looks like you're outnumbered, Clay." Josiah's face paled, his arrogance replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. For once in his life he was utterly speechless, unable to find the words to express his frustration and humiliation. He simply turned his horse around, spurring it into a gallop, and rode away, his men following close behind, their tails between their legs. That night, as the moon cast its silvery glow across the ranch, Abigail sat on the porch beside Caleb, her fingers intertwined with his, their touch a silent testament to their love and their shared victory over adversity. On the crest were the dozen riders, armed, ready, not ranchers, not soldiers, former bondsmen, runaways, men and women who remembered Abigail from the kitchens, the fields, the hush of escape in the night. So, ultimately, this story reminds us that even after enduring unimaginable hardship, hope, love, and belonging are always possible. It's about the unbreakable bonds of family, the courage to reclaim your identity, and the power of community to stand up for what's right. It's a testament to the fact that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that kindness and unwavering support can triumph over even the darkest forces. What did you think of Abigail's journey? Did any particular moment resonate with you? I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or any interpretations you might have in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of resilience, redemption, and the triumph of the human spirit, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future uploads. Thanks for watching.